But what we can do is now also modify the U-turns. So all that we have left in single slice turns is the inner layer slice that we had with R, which is the 2R here and the 2R there. By doing this, applying to the cube, we have 2 center pieces per edge that is swapped, and that's exactly equivalent to if we had. So this is actually something that we're going to use. And for this specific algorithm, we're going to use a different commutator, a different 1x2x2 block swapper. There are several different commutators that swap these type of blocks in this kind of fashion. Maybe not exactly like this, but they may swap the blocks like 2 here and the third one here, or 2 here and the third one here, in this part right here, and so forth. But all we have to do now to modify it to be the commutator that we're actually going to build this algorithm from, invert the 2L moves. So instead of this, we have this. Applying this commutator to the cube, it moves the same 2 1x2 blocks here, but it moves the third one. The third one involved is down here instead of up there. So in summary, we've basically done a variation of the center commutator, and we initially had it to cycle or swap 3 edge pieces, but then we worked our way towards converting some of the turns to wide turns, outer block turns, so that the center pieces adjacent to those edge pieces would also be swapped. Of course, in order to do this, we first had to separate the outer block slices from the inner layer slices of the commutator in order to do this without scrambling the cube and having it resemble 2gen. To make things a lot easier, before we go any further, we need to translate this commutator to the 5x5 so that we can represent odd cubes. There's a difference between odd and even cubes. The central slice on odd cubes does make a difference now. Why I say so? If I apply this commutator to the 5x5, yes, the 3 edges and the 3 1x2x2 blocks are still swapped in the same area, but now on the 5x5, not enough center pieces are swapped in the 3 cycle of blocks. We need a total of 9 center pieces to be in this 3 cycle of blocks, because when we put 2 of them back, 6 will remain out of place along with 2 edges, which is what we need to do in order to make a pure algorithm. It's usually not this simple with all of the commutators that cycle blocks such as this one, but in this case all we have to do is convert the double turns of L to triple layer turns of L on the 5x5. So just taking that commutator and just putting a 3 instead of a 2, just changing those coefficients there, and apply it to the 5x5. Now we don't have anything messed up, and now we just have 3 1x2x3 blocks swapped now instead of 3 1x2x2 blocks. And so I'll just play this slowly so you can see how it works. So first what we do is we move that inner layer slice to R. Then we move that Y turn of U. Yeah, just focus on that right there. Next we move that up so that this 1x3 block is in the spot where the first one that we put there originally was. So now when we undo that U-turn and move that back down, that is right here, and we just do a few more moves to restore the cube. And that is the number of center pieces we need that are adjacent to the 3 edges that we swapped. And also from this point, what I'm going to do is not use the 4x4 anymore, because all we have to do if we want to translate to the 4x4 is just take these triple layer turns of L and make them into double layer turns of L for the 4x4. So what we need to do is, just like with when we wanted to swap 2 edges in the slice 2R, what we need to do is take the third edge and move it back here, and then do a setup move with involving B to get it in the R slice. So in this case, all we need to do is just move these 3 layers twice so that the 1 by 2 by 3 block affected will be back there, which is this. And I have prime here because I just like to move it away from me instead of towards me, but you can have it just without the prime. It's the same thing. But now we have this result where these two stayed in the same positions. It didn't affect their positions, because if I undo those setup moves, the pieces change, but the location or the slot of the block stays the same for these two blocks here. But this slot here is now going to be, because I move it twice, it's the same as if you just take it and move it twice and see where it goes. That's where the setup moves affect. It'll be up here, obviously. And so that's where it is with those setup moves. So the last setup move we have to do is B. Well, in this case, in sign notation, it's 2B, and the B is lowercase because we're moving the outer layer as well. And then we invert at the end for 2B prime. And look, this is pretty cool because now the only slice affected is 2R, which is the slice that we need to be affected only. And all we have to do from this point is do a quarter turn, which will make the inner layer turns odd, as well as solve back 2 of the 4 edge pieces and half of the center pieces. So just adding that in. One quick thing to note about how this almost looks like an interior J-perm. If we take a look at this and we compare it, if you've watched the derivation of the standard algorithm or with other algorithms which are single slice turn based, not wide turn based like this one, you can visualize this as being an interior J-perm slid toward us, because this is the front, so it's slid toward us one piece. For example, this is the interior J-perm, which is seen from normal algorithms. This is what you need to build a pure edge flip algorithm from them. And all that we have is the same amount of pieces. The only thing is, whoop, it's moved. You see? So that's why we can still make a pure algorithm from this, and it can be as brief as it can be, because we still affect the same amount of pieces, just in a different way, so we have to handle it differently. We have 2 edge pieces swapped oppositely like this. How about we just try to make a pure edge flip algorithm from it? So all we have to do, if we hold it like this, in this case, the moves will be 2L2 and U2. Adding those setup moves here and inverting them here, we apply it to the cube. Look at what we have. We have 2 edges swapped and only just a tiny bit of centers that are not solved. So anyway, this is cool. For convenience, how about instead of doing 2L to U2, instead let's just do D2. So from this point, if we just apply the setup move Y2, which is just a cube rotation, it's really not a move. Now it's in the front, like this. From this point, we actually can make a pure algorithm in very few moves, and with setup moves. It may not be initially obvious, but look. Back here, all of these center pieces, arrows, are facing the correct direction. Why I say it's correct? Because the corners arrows are facing the same direction. So none of these were affected by this algorithm that we have here. So because that's the case, we can actually take this, visualize taking this 1x3 block and moving it here to where this one is. Because what we want to do is swap the same color with the same color, and the easiest way is to swap black with black in this particular case. So what we can do is just visualize. If we take this slice and we move it down, which is 2B, and now we take this, which is E, and that's capital E, Then this 1x3 block from the top, which was not touched originally, now is in the spot where all the black pieces from the top go. So now what's going to happen, because this wasn't affected before, all the black pieces from here are going to swap with these, and these are going to go where the red pieces went. So now black will swap with black. These are the setup moves, 2B, E, and then you invert the N, E prime to B prime. And look what happens. Wow. It is a pure algorithm. And it's 27 quarter turns and 21 half turns. So this is definitely not what we're trying to derive, but this is definitely on the way to what we need to derive. And I just wanted to show you real quick that we're really close. This is how you begin to finally not have to solve those center pieces back once you have done a two adjacent edge swap or a one edge flip, wherever you want to refer to it as. But interestingly though, look at the center pieces. They're not swapped like they were before with the standard algorithm like this. You see here it looks much cleaner. It's just that this 1x3 block was swapped with that one, and all we have to do is consider the moveset of the standard algorithm, and this makes perfect sense why this is so. But anyway, so yeah, and notice also, look at the number of the center pieces that are messed up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The same amount as with the standard algorithm. See, 6 are messed up, 2 times 3. So it's the same amount, it's just in a different way. And that's exactly what most of the algorithms from this type, they do. There are some that I can actually mimic the standard algorithms, the way they move the pieces, but those are of their own category, and that's not how this algorithm swaps the pieces. So basically what we had a 15 quarter turn base, which is this portion here. All this piece is made of is that commutator, setup moves, and the quarter turn. So it swapped the 2 edge pieces and half of the center pieces. So we had a 15 move base, and what we did is we added a total of 6 quarter turns before and after for a grand total of 27 quarter turns to make a pure algorithm, which is not bad because the minimum with the standard approach is 25, so we're only 2 over, but we're going to go way under with the next technique that I'm going to use. However, I'm going to just mention a little bit more about this type of base. With this type of base, there are actually a minimum, from what I have been able to find, of 5 quarter turns that you can do before and after this to make it a pure edge flip. With other commutators, you can actually get a 13 quarter turn base. You doing the same exact task. Five plus 13 plus 5 is equivalent to 10 plus 13, which is 23. So you can easily get a 23 quarter turn move algorithm instead of a 27 if you use an alternate commutator. And of course you have to translate to the 5x5 just like we did with this commutator at the beginning. I know it's a lot to take in, all of this stuff, but there's a lot more to this than I'm trying to put in this video. But that was just a side note. With different commutators and different bases, you can apply those 5 setup moves, and one of the setup moves will cancel with the last move of the base, leaving you with a 22 quarter turn algorithm. I'll illustrate 5 setup moves that you can do, just real quick, my favorite set of 5 setup moves. So, in order to apply them, all I have to do is do a setup move for a Y2 cube rotation setup move to this. So I take this and add the setup moves just like this. Applying this to a cube, that slid in J-perm, it moved right there. So from this point, and how I found these setup moves took a long process to find them, but they're pretty neat. The following 5. Now this will not generate a 23 quarter turn algorithm, but it easily can with other commutators. I'm going to go ahead and apply it to the cube, and I'm actually going to illustrate it too. Well, look, it makes a cross on the 5x5. and it also swaps these pieces down here in this face. So swapping center pieces in two separate faces is actually very common. But anyway, just go ahead and apply it. And from this point, well, maybe you're asking why these setup moves work. Well, I'll briefly go over it. One, if I look at the cube at this angle, notice that the two center blocks in these two locations are the same color. Also notice that these two edge pieces are the same two colors as well, and they're the ones that are going to be swapped. And lastly, notice these two center pieces, that they are also the same color. These are the three criteria that matches this result. This right here is swapped with this one, because if we just move this slice down, this is perfectly solved. And similarly, if we move this up, this is perfectly solved. So therefore, these two 1x2 center blocks here were swapped with each other, and obviously the only two center pieces left are these two, which are swapped with each other, and these two are swapped with each other. So that setup, those setup moves give is exactly what this does, and that's how you can look at a pure algorithm with setup moves. It's just you're setting up the centers and the edges at the same time, and your goal is to do it in the least number of moves. And as I've said, 5/4 turns is the least that I can find. If there's less, it would be really interesting to see, but I doubt it. Because we have this situation where the minimum number of setup moves from that semi-J-perm is 5, and as I've said, the minimum for the base is concerned in quarter turns is 13, that gives us a minimum of 22 to 23, depending on whether you have a move cancellation between the setup moves and the base or not. How in the world do we get the move count down? We are forced to do something that is a little bit unobvious, but at the same time, our best friend. I call it shifting. This is the most powerful technique that you'll ever learn as far as keeping an algorithm brief but accomplishing more difficult tasks than what you originally were prepared for to make yourself without using this technique. What we need to do is shift this algorithm. At this point, the two edges that are affected are in the back and opposite to one another. That's one of the main reasons why it takes so many setup moves to get these two edges to swap with each other, the same color edges. But when we shift it, something interesting is really going to happen. So what I'm going to do, when I mean by shift, is take the first move. I know it seems a little bit weird, but take the first move and make it the last move. And I'm going to actually put it here so we know how many we shifted, so this being the last move, and this will be a line of moves. But if we take this, we apply it to the cube, wow, look what happened. The same amount of pieces is affected by this shifted base. Now, I call it a shifted base, but they're swapped in a different way. Still, these two edges are opposite to one another, so this is absolutely useless to us. But you could maybe, like from this point, if you wanted to for fun, you could do the setup move 2M and then 2M prime to swap these two, so that, and you see what it does is it swaps these two down here and it leaves this untouched, but this is pretty useless for our purposes. But it makes us have a much easier setup to do even that just by shifting it once. Anyway, shifting it again, if we take the second move and we move it to the end, now the edges are in a different location. Now they're diagonally opposite like this. I'm going to shift the next move. Two same color centers are swapped with each other, which does not happen very often with shifts, especially with a 5x5 cube. Now we're going to shift it again, and actually just one more time, taking 2U and moving it to the end. That's what we want. This is really a good setup for us. So from this point, since the two edges are diagonal to each other, technically all we have to do is one setup move to swap them in the same composite edge as opposed to 4. If I go ahead and I apply the setup move 2D prime and I invert at the end, look what happens. Yeah, the center pieces, they're messed up. By doing that setup move, we destroyed that two same color swap of the central edge pieces on the 5x5, center pieces that look like edges on the 5x5. We've messed that up, but look, we swapped 2 of these edges, and this whole thing is in 17 quarter turns, which is pretty impressive because that's even 2 moves less than we had before, and we preserved half of the centers more than we have at the very beginning. What I've done is I've taken the algorithm and I've shifted all of these moves, the first 5 quarter turns, and then I added those setup moves. Now this is not what we need. What we're going to need to do is first take out these setup moves, and we're going to have to set up the centers now so that they're solved. Unfortunately, we cannot do very much with what we have in the front face. All of these edge pieces, they're swapped with each other, so if you go to a regular 5x5, it only looks like 2 corner center pieces are swapped with each other, and these 2 are swapped with each other. And that is true, but there's also center pieces within the face F that are also swapped with each other. So, but just real quick, just to be kind of cool, how about we just do the setup move 2B? And that's lowercase, of course, because we're including the outer layer, according to sign notation. The invert at the end with 2B prime. Like so. What will happen is this: a pure diagonal edge swap. Going back to the 5x5 super to see what's really happening, and omitting those moves because we want to do something else, what we first need to realize is that if we want to add setup moves to this, we need to not affect the front face at all, because we really cannot do any slice whatsoever in F without messing this swap of pieces up. For instance, I cannot do this slice because then this will be green and this will be red when I move it back, because this and this were swapped. We can't do this slice either because, again, these 2 pieces are swapped, and that would either make it yellow or black depending on which direction we made this a setup move with. We cannot do this, and we cannot do this, and we cannot do this, and we cannot do this, because these are diagonal to each other. If they were on the same side of the cube, then we were free to, like, if they were both on this side, we would be free to move this as a setup move without discoloring any more center pieces than what we already have. But basically with a setup move, if you want to affect less pieces than what you currently have, the setup move has to run through pieces that aren't currently affected by, say, a shifted base such as this. So what we want to do, because we cannot really apply any slices through this front face except for outer slices U and D, which won't affect any pieces at all except for this piece right here will move with D. But with U, it's perfectly clean, nothing, it's not even touched at all. So what we need to do to preserve all of this, meaning that we don't mess up any more center pieces than what we had before, and we don't want to worry about these right now, and not affect the location of the edges, what we're going to have to do is bring the top face, which is unaffected, in the location where those pieces are. That way, this will be affected when we move it back, and the path between this edge and the location where it needs to go with 2D prime will be a much cleaner one. So if I add the setup move M and I invert it with M prime, well, this piece from down there moves here, which is not very convenient for us. I'll deal with that in a minute. But look, you see the same pieces are swapped here and this one with that one as well. So now, if we were to just take this and do 2D prime to bring this edge here, so it swaps with this one, and that's what I mean, this is what we have. Now all we have is 2 center corner pieces that are X center pieces. They're also referred to as because like they're in a perfect X if you look at the center pieces. Like this, X. So anyway, so 2 X center pieces are swapped and 2 edge pieces are swapped. So basically this is very close to being pure, and look how many moves it is. It's not that many moves at all. It's only 19 quarter turns and it does all of this stuff. It's just really impressive. But now we're going to have to do another step. I'm going to go ahead and take a screenshot of it So we can keep that in mind, what pieces it swapped. And I'm going to go back to the beginning of the algorithm before it even is applied to the cube, and I'm going to go ahead and let it execute those two moves. Now what is the problem? We have to locate those pieces that are affected. Let's go back to the screenshot. See here, it's the bottom right corner of the red and the bottom right corner of the blue. So the bottom right corner is swapped with the bottom right corner of the blue. You see, if you visualize this in the spot where it should be over here, clearly this piece right here is swapped with this one right here. So if we want to swap blue with blue or red with red, we have to choose. We don't have a choice. I mean, if we want to make this algorithm as brief as we can, clearly if we just move this slice D, capital D, then red will swap with red. And this is actually the setup moves before the algorithm even begins. And this is all we need to do to make a pure algorithm. And this is in fact the holy grail on the 5x5 cube. As I said before, when we translated the commutator from the 4x4 to the 5x5 so that it swapped 3 1x2x3 blocks instead of 3 1x2x2 blocks, if we wanted to convert the 5x5 to the 4x4, it's just make the L turns 2 layer turns instead of 3. So going ahead and doing that and applying to the 4x4, indeed it does make a pure edge flip algorithm as well. So now from this point what I'm going to do is basically we have the algorithm. That's it. I mean, now there's another step to apply this to higher ordered cubes 6x6 and above, and you'll see why if you stick with me. It's going to get much more complicated to do this, and much more knowledge is required to understand why it works, and I'm going to go through that with you. But what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to show you how I optimized it to be what it is at the beginning, the optimization process. We can just cancel two moves and make this algorithm from 21Q/19H to be a 19 quarter turn and 18 half turn algorithm. In addition, we can optimize it for speed. Again, we will use the 5x5 version because all we have to do to convert to the 4x4 is make triple layer turns to double layer. So we start with this, and we're going to cancel some moves here. First, we're going to cancel 2U with D prime. They're moving in the same direction and they're opposite faces, so we can merge them as a single inner slice with a Y cube rotation. At the same time, we can also cancel this triple layer turn of L with this single layer turn, inner layer turn of R, to make it 4L prime, 3L prime. It's the same thing. And at the same time, we can go ahead and add Z and Z prime to this, making it in the top edge, top front edge, like usual, like we normally have algorithms. And doing 4L prime, 3L prime is just really not as fast as, say, doing an equivalent of it with the X2 cube rotation. If we just make that 2R prime, R prime, that's much better for execution, and all we have to do is add an X2 to make it totally equivalent so it doesn't scramble the cube. But everything else remained the same. I just made that one change. Now what we need to do, since we don't want an X2 cube rotation in the middle of the algorithm, we're just going to have to carry this out through the end of the algorithm instead of trying to go before, because it's not that bad beforehand. So why don't we just take this X2 cube rotation and apply it to the moves between here and the end. By doing that, we'll get this result here, which you can see by using a real cube in your hands. It's easier to see it this way. And here I added Y prime, and so that you can just do M prime for short, and then finish off with 3D. Now when I have Z prime, it's not good. So from here we can just fix this a little bit more if we just make that 2U instead of 3D, and then we do Z prime. It's still not what we want, but at least it's U instead of D moves. And what happens is now we're just a Y2 cube rotation away from being where we need to be. So we could add Y2. Instead of doing Z prime, if we do X2, then we still have it. And so this is my preference. I mean, there's so many different ways to optimize this. And of course, this is not really supposed to be a speed solving algorithm, but it's actually a much better algorithm than many of its counterparts as far as speed goes. We have now optimized the algorithm, and it's the same exact algorithm that I showed at the very beginning of the video. It's the same form. The moves are canceled now, and remember to translate to the 4x4. All we have to do, well, maybe it's not initially obvious, just copying and pasting it. Well, the only thing that will change, that'll become a 2, that'll become a 2, that'll become a 2, and this right here, 2 through 3U, that'll just become 2U. Now you have an algorithm that works with 4x4 and 5x5. But this right here, this algorithm that we see, is actually not the general form of this algorithm, how it really is, applied to all size cubes.